It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday morning, the kind I had lived through countless times before, and yet that morning has lived with me ever since, echoing in the corners of my memory like an unresolved chord. I had gone to church as usual, dressed in my neat cardigan, my sensible shoes clicking against the old stone floor, my mind drifting through hymns and sermons. I had been halfway home when I realized I had forgotten my reading glasses on the pew, the pair with the little floral etching on the rims that my granddaughter had insisted made me look modern. At first I thought of leaving them, telling myself I could fetch them later, but a small, insistent tug in my chest told me to turn back. I retraced my steps through the quiet streets, the bells having already finished their echo, and when I reached the heavy oak doors of the church, I pushed them open as gently as I could, expecting to find the sanctuary empty. Instead, I was met with voices, low, murmuring, urgent voices that did not belong to the kindly congregation I had just left. My heart skipped, and I froze in the doorway, pressing myself against the cold wood so I could listen without being seen. The voices came not from the main sanctuary, but from the fellowship hall beyond the vestibule, a room where we normally held coffee hours or rummage sales. But now, those voices carried a tone that was sharper, more secretive, and each word seemed to vibrate with a weight I couldn't quite place. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to leave, to fetch my glasses another time. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and mine has always been stronger than most. I tiptoed forward, each step echoing faintly on the tiles, until I reached the edge of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to peer through the crack. What I saw made my stomach twist into knots. A circle of people stood around a long table draped in black cloth, and though the lighting was dim, I recognized several familiar faces, faces of people I had shared pews with for decades. Mrs. Avery, who baked the best blueberry muffins for Sunday school. Mr. Daniels, the organist whose hands had trembled with age but never missed a note. Even Pastor Michael himself stood among them, his expression grim, his hands clasped behind his back. In the center of the table lay a large leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age, and beside it a small wooden box that seemed to hum with a strange presence, as though the very air bent around it. One by one, they placed their hands on the book, murmuring words I couldn't make out, and I felt a chill snake down my spine. This wasn't prayer, at least not the kind I'd ever been taught. It felt older, darker, and more dangerous. My breath caught, and for a moment I feared they would hear me. My glasses were somewhere in that very hall, likely left on the table by the front row, but the thought of stepping in to retrieve them now seemed laughable. I should have fled, but my feet would not move. Instead, I pressed closer to the crack in the door, desperate to understand what I was witnessing. And as I did, one of the figures lifted the wooden box and opened it. Though I couldn't see the contents clearly, a faint metallic glint caught the light. The group gasped in unison, and the murmuring ceased. Pastor Michael leaned forward and whispered something I barely caught. "It's ready." My blood ran cold. Ready for what? What was this ritual, this gathering hidden beneath the guise of Sunday fellowship? My knees trembled, and I clutched the doorframe for balance. At that moment, dear listener, I must pause and ask you, if you had been in my shoes, standing on the edge of a secret you were never meant to see, what would you have done? Would you have burst in and demanded answers, or slipped away silently, pretending you had seen nothing? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes I still wonder what might have happened if I had chosen differently. And while you think about that, don't forget to like this story if it has your heart racing, subscribe for more of my tales, and ring that little bell so you never miss what comes next, because believe me, this is only the beginning. I lingered there, caught between fear and fascination, and before I could retreat, a sudden creak betrayed me. The floorboard beneath my foot groaned, Echoing through the hall like a gunshot, the circle of people froze. Every head turned toward the door. My blood seemed to drain from my body as I realized there was no escape, not without being seen. Slowly the door swung wider, and Pastor Michael's eyes met mine. They were not filled with kindness as they were during sermons, but with something far sharper, colder, and utterly alien. "Ah," he said, his voice carrying across the silence, "we have an unexpected guest." My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I might faint right there in the doorway. But the circle parted just enough for Pastor Michael to step forward, his eyes never leaving mine, and the others whispered among themselves like a rustling of dry leaves in the wind. "Come in," he said softly, though there was nothing welcoming in his tone, nothing pastoral in the way his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. My hand trembled on the doorframe, but I forced myself to step into the hall, trying to appear calm, though my legs felt like they might buckle beneath me at any moment. The scent of beeswax candles and something else, earthy, metallic, unsettling, filled my nose, and I saw now that the book on the table was inscribed with symbols I did not recognize, looping characters that seemed to shift when I stared too long. The wooden box remained open, and though I dared not look too closely, I caught sight of a tarnished medallion inside, its surface etched with markings that mirrored those on the book. Mrs. Avery's gaze met mine, and though her face was as familiar to me as the worn hymnals we shared each Sunday, there was something different in her eyes now, something secretive, something I couldn't reconcile with the woman who used to slip extra muffins to children after service. "I was just coming back for my glasses," I stammered, my voice higher than I intended, betraying the pounding of my heart. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Laughter rippled through the group, but it was not warm or kind. It was mocking, and it sent a chill racing across my skin. Pastor Michael stepped closer until he stood only a foot away, his presence heavy as though he carried the weight of the entire room. "Nothing happens by accident," he murmured, his voice low, almost tender, yet laced with something that made my blood run cold. "If you are here, it is because you were meant to see." He extended a hand, gesturing toward the table, and though every fiber of my being screamed to run, my feet betrayed me. I moved closer, drawn by some force I couldn't name, until I stood at the edge of the circle, staring down at the book and the medallion. My glasses sat at the far end of the table, perched innocently as though they hadn't been the reason I'd stumbled into this nightmare at all. "What is this?" I whispered, but my question was swallowed by the silence that pressed in around me. Mr. Daniels, the organist, spoke then, his voice hoarse yet steady. "It is older than this town, older than any of us. You should not have seen it." The others nodded in agreement, their faces solemn, their eyes gleaming in the flickering candlelight. I wanted to protest, to insist I had no interest in their secrets, but before I could form the words, Mrs. Avery reached into the box and lifted the medallion, holding it up so the candlelight danced across its surface. The symbols seemed to writhe, alive, and for a moment I swore I heard a faint whispering that did not come from any human mouth. My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Pastor Michael leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "Now that you have seen, you must choose silence or service." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, and my mouth went dry. Service, silence. What did those choices mean? I had never been one for conspiracies or hidden societies, yet here I was, standing in the middle of something that felt more dangerous than anything I'd ever encountered. I glanced at my glasses so close and thought of simply grabbing them and fleeing, but I knew in my bones that these people, my friends, my neighbors, my pastor, would never allow me to leave with what I now knew. The room grew colder, and the candle flames flickered as though stirred by an unseen wind. "Why me?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I asked them or myself. No one answered. Instead, the circle closed in slightly, hemming me nearer to the table. The book, the medallion. My pulse thundered in my ears, and as I looked around at their faces, all so familiar yet so strange, I realized the life I had known would never be the same. And now, dear listener, I turn to you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have sworn silence and walked away with this terrible knowledge gnawing at your soul? Or would you have demanded answers, no matter the cost? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I need to know if I was foolish or simply human in the choice I made next. And if this story has you clutching your seat, don't forget to subscribe and like, because the deeper we go, the darker this tale becomes. Pastor Michael straightened then, his smile widening though his eyes remained cold, and he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "Let us show her." The words, "Let us show her," hung in the air like the toll of a bell, reverberating through my chest until I felt my very bones hum with dread. Before I could move, before I could even blink, two of them stepped forward, Mr. Daniels with his trembling hands, and Mrs. Avery with her ever-watchful eyes, and each took hold of one side of the heavy leather-bound book. They lifted it as though it were fragile, sacred, and carried it to a smaller table at the center of the circle, the one draped in darker cloth. The candles flickered as they set it down, and the room grew quieter still, so quiet I thought I might hear the frantic beating of my own heart echoing against the walls. Pastor Michael gestured for me to step closer, and though fear locked my knees, something compelled me forward like invisible threads tugging at my body. "You have lived in this town your whole life," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "You think you know its history, but history is only what the victors choose to write. We are the keepers of what was hidden." He opened the book, and the smell of old paper, ink, and something faintly metallic wafted out, so strong it made me dizzy. The pages were covered in those strange symbols, curling and looping in ways that seemed almost alive, and as the candlelight hit the ink, the words shimmered as though freshly written. He pointed to a passage halfway down the page, his finger hovering over the words. "This," he whispered, "is the covenant that built this town. Every brick, every field, every harvest, it all comes back to this." My mouth was dry as I croaked. A covenant with who? Or perhaps with what? Though I couldn't be sure my voice had even left my lips. His eyes flicked to mine, dark and unyielding, and then to the wooden box that still sat nearby. Mrs. Avery lifted the medallion again, raising it high above her head, and the candle flames bent toward it as though reaching. A low hum filled the room, not from the people, not from any instrument, but from the walls themselves, vibrating with an energy that made my teeth chatter. My knees weakened, and I clutched at the edge of the smaller table to steady myself. Pastor Michael's words slithered into my ears. This town was founded not by faith alone, but by a promise that must be renewed lest we pay the price. The circle began to chant then, low and rhythmic, and though I could not understand the words, they scraped against my nerves like claws. I wanted to run, to scream, to pretend I had never turned back for those wretched glasses, but I stood frozen, every nerve in my body alive with terror. Then, with a sharp motion, Pastor Michael snapped the book shut, and the chanting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence was suffocating. He leaned toward me so close I could see the lines etched deep into his face. "Now you know," he said. "The question is, will you keep the covenant or will you break it?" His words landed like a hammer blow, and I realized this was no longer about curiosity or happenstance. I had stumbled into something ancient, something binding, and whether I liked it or not, I had been woven into its threads. And here, dear listener, I must stop and ask you, if you were standing in that circle, hearing that your entire town was built on a secret promise that demanded loyalty, would you have sworn yourself to silence? Or would you have risked everything to break away? Tell me in the comments, because I still don't know if my heart was brave or foolish in what I did next. And if this story has your pulse quickening, remember to like this video and subscribe, because the shadows of this tale only grow longer from here. My hands shook as I reached for my glasses, sitting only inches away, the innocent object that had led me into this nightmare. But before I could grasp them, Pastor Michael's hand shot out and pressed mine firmly against the table, his grip like iron. His eyes bore into mine, and in that moment I realized this was not a choice I could simply walk away from. They weren't going to let me leave until I gave them an answer. Pastor Michael's grip tightened on my hand until I thought my bones might snap, and the others in the circle leaned closer, their faces illuminated by candlelight, their eyes glimmering with something I could only call hunger. I wanted to yank my hand away, to scream, to run, but my body felt heavy, trapped not just by his grasp, but by the oppressive atmosphere that pressed in on all sides. "The covenant has always demanded sacrifice," he murmured, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of a distant storm. My heart lurched as he continued, "Our ancestors bound themselves to something greater than themselves, something that promised prosperity in exchange for obedience. Every harvest, every home spared from disaster, every life lived in comfort, it was purchased, not earned. And now you too must decide whether you will stand with us or against us." His words sank into me like stones thrown into a deep well, and I felt myself drowning in them. Mrs. Avery stepped forward then, still clutching the medallion, and held it before my eyes. The markings seemed to shimmer and shift, and for a moment I swore I saw them form into shapes, eyes, unblinking, staring straight into my soul. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the image burned into my mind. "She resists," Mrs. Avery said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Perhaps she should be shown what happens to those who refuse." A murmur rippled through the group, and several nodded gravely. Pastor Michael released my hand then, only to gesture toward Mr. Daniels, who shuffled to the back of the hall. He returned, dragging something heavy, wrapped in coarse cloth, leaving faint streaks of dust on the floor. My breath quickened as he set it down with a thud before me. The cloth slipped, revealing what looked like an old portrait frame, cracked and warped with age. But when they turned it upright, I gasped. It was no portrait. It was a mirror, tall, its surface rippling like water, its frame carved with the same symbols etched on the book and medallion. The candlelight did not reflect normally in it. Instead, the surface shimmered dark and deep, like the mouth of a tunnel. Pastor Michael's voice dropped to a near whisper. "This is what awaits those who betray the covenant." He gestured, and two of the congregation members stepped forward, pulling the mirror closer until it stood only inches from me. I stared, my reflection wavering, distorted, and then my reflection moved on its own. Its lips curled into a cruel smile I had not made. Its eyes gleamed with malice. I stumbled back, colliding with the table, nearly knocking over the heavy book. Gasps rose from the circle, but no one reached to help me. Instead, they watched with eerie calm, as though this was a lesson they had all seen before. "The mirror shows the fate of oath breakers," Mrs. Avery intoned, her voice trembling with a mix of reverence and fear. The reflection began to twist further, its features grotesque, its skin withering before my eyes, until what stared back at me was a hollowed version of myself, aged beyond recognition, eyes sunken, mouth frozen in a scream. My chest tightened, and tears blurred my vision. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This can't be real." But the reflection reached out from the glass, its hand pressing against the inside of the mirror, and I felt a coldness seep into the room, wrapping around my limbs like chains. I couldn't breathe. Pastor Michael's voice thundered suddenly, breaking the silence. "Choose!" The word echoed, rattling the very walls. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, gasping for breath, the image in the mirror still clawing at my mind. In that moment, dear listener, I must ask you, if you had seen your own face twisted into a horror, promised as the price of defiance, what would you have done? Would you have bowed your head and surrendered, or would you have risked becoming the very thing you feared? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know, because that night my decision felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. And while you think on that, don't forget to like this story if it chills you to the bone, and subscribe so you never miss the twists yet to come. For this tale is not finished, and what lay beyond that mirror was only the beginning of the nightmare. I pressed my trembling palms against the floor, trying to find my strength, and when I looked up, I saw Pastor Michael watching me intently, as though weighing my very soul. "She has seen enough," he declared, and with a wave of his hand, the mirror rippled once more before fading back into a normal reflection. My reflection looked back at me again, pale, trembling, but still mine. I could not tell if I had been spared or mocked. The mirror's surface stilled again, showing only my pale, shaking reflection. But the memory of what I had seen lingered like a stain on my soul. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, willing my heart to steady, yet it thundered all the louder, as if it knew something my mind dared not name. Pastor Michael closed the heavy book with a snap that echoed like a gunshot, and the circle drew tighter around me, the faces of my neighbors and fellow churchgoers now seeming more like masks than the kind smiles I had once trusted. "The covenant must not be broken," he intoned, his voice deep and commanding, "for it binds us all. To refuse is to invite ruin not only upon yourself, but upon everyone who shares this soil." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and I realized with a cold dread that this wasn't simply about me. It was about keeping their secret, keeping their power, keeping whatever bargain had been made generations ago. Mrs. Avery, still clutching the medallion, leaned in so close I could see the sheen of sweat on her brow. "You have to understand," she whispered, though there was no kindness in her words. "This town thrives because of what we do. Every bountiful harvest, every spared storm, every illness that passes over us, it all comes from honoring the covenant. Without it," she let the words trail off, but her eyes told the rest of the story. "Without it, there would be suffering. Without it, the town would wither. Without it, perhaps we all would die." My throat tightened as I tried to speak. "And what happens if I refuse?" I forced out, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Pastor Michael's expression hardened. "You've already seen what awaits oath-breakers," he said, nodding toward the mirror. "But worse still, you would bring down the weight of the covenant upon us all, and I promise you they would not forgive you." At that, the group as one lifted their gazes toward the ceiling, as though acknowledging some unseen presence above us. A chill crawled up my spine, and for the first time I wondered if they were imagining it, or if something truly was listening. The candle flames guttered, flickering violently, though no wind stirred. I shivered, clutching my arms, and realized they were waiting for my answer. Every pair of eyes in the room bore into me, heavy with expectation. I thought of my family, my grandchildren, my neighbors who knew nothing of what I was seeing here tonight. If I refused, would they suffer for it? If I accepted, what would that make me? My mind spiraled, and in that moment I turned to you, dear listener. What would you have done if the weight of an entire town rested on your choice? Would you have bowed your head and protected the many, or stood tall and risked their wrath to hold on to your soul? Tell me in the comments, because I wrestle with that question still, and perhaps your answer will give me peace. And don't forget, if this story grips you the way it gripped my heart that night, to like and subscribe, because there are darker truths yet to be revealed. I drew a shaky breath, and at last I managed to stand, though my knees quivered beneath me. "I need time," I said, my voice faint but firm enough to echo in the silence. A ripple of disapproval surged through the circle, but Pastor Michael raised his hand and they fell quiet. He studied me, his eyes narrowing, and then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Time," he repeated, as though the word itself was an unfamiliar concept. "Very well, but understand, time is not mercy. It is a rope, and it grows shorter with every hour." With that, he gestured, and the circle parted just enough for me to pass. My glasses still lay on the table, forgotten in the tension of the moment, but I reached out and snatched them, clutching them tight as though they might anchor me to the life I once knew. The others watched in silence as I backed away, their faces unreadable masks of shadow and flame. When I reached the doorway, I dared to glance back one last time. The mirror still stood, dark and waiting, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw a hand press against its surface from the inside, a hand that wasn't mine. I fled then, out into the cool night air, my lungs burning with the need for freedom. But even as I stumbled home, the echo of Pastor Michael's words chased me. Time is a rope, and I feared that rope was already tightening around my neck. The cool night air should have brought me comfort after the suffocating heat of the candlelit hall, but instead it bit into my skin like icy fingers, each gust carrying with it whispers that seemed to echo the chant I had just escaped. My house wasn't far, yet every step home felt like trudging through a dream where the ground shifts beneath your feet, where each shadow grows teeth and eyes, watching, waiting. By the time I reached my porch, I was drenched in sweat despite the cold, and my hands shook so badly I fumbled with the key, dropping it twice before forcing it into the lock. Once inside, I bolted the door and leaned against it, pressing my forehead to the wood, trying to believe I had truly gotten away. But then I realized I hadn't. The Covenant wasn't a room I could walk out of. It was stitched into the very fabric of this town, into the people, into the air. It had followed me. The mirror's image burned in my mind, my reflection's twisted face grinning as though mocking my futile attempt at escape. I staggered into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, but when I lifted it to my lips, the liquid rippled on its own, as though something had disturbed it. My heart leapt, and I set the glass down too hard, shattering it across the counter. The shards gleamed under the dim light, and for one horrible moment they didn't reflect me at all. They reflected that other face, that hollow-eyed husk of myself. I stumbled back with a gasp, clutching my chest, the edges of panic scraping at me. That night, sleep did not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror. I heard Pastor Michael's voice. "Time is a rope." And worse, I felt the sensation of that unseen hand pressing from the other side of the glass, reaching for me. By dawn, I had convinced myself it was my imagination, that my mind was fraying under the weight of fear. But when I stepped outside, the world offered no comfort. On my porch, resting neatly on the welcome mat, was the medallion Mrs. Avery had held. Its surface was cold to the touch, its markings sharp, and I knew it hadn't been there when I stumbled home the night before. My stomach sank, realizing they had followed me, or worse, they had never let me go. I wrapped the medallion in a cloth and stuffed it into a drawer, but all day I felt its presence like a pulse, beating through the walls of my home. And then the whispers began. At first, faint, like the creaking of old wood or the rustling of leaves, but soon they grew clearer, threads of words spoken just beyond understanding. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't matter. The whispers weren't outside. They were inside me. "Join us." The rope tightens. The mirror waits. I wanted to run to someone, anyone, but who could I tell? that my church, my friends, my neighbors were part of some secret meeting tied to an ancient covenant, that I had seen my own reflection rotting away in a cursed mirror. They would call me mad. Or worse, they would nod knowingly, because they were part of it. And dear listener, this is where I pause to ask you, what would you have done standing in my shoes with fear scratching at your sanity and no one left to trust? Would you have hidden in silence or risked everything to scream the truth? Comment below with your answer, because even now I wonder if I chose wrong. And while you think, don't forget to like this tale if the suspense coils tight in your chest, and subscribe if you want to walk with me further into the shadows of this story, for it grows darker still. That evening, as the sun set and shadows pooled in the corners of my home, I heard a knock at the door. My body went cold. It was slow, deliberate. 3 heavy thuds that rattled the frame. I dared not answer, dared not even breathe, but the knocking came again, harder, insistent. Gathering every ounce of courage, I crept to the window and pulled the curtain aside just a sliver. My blood ran cold. Standing there on my porch were 3 figures in long, dark cloaks, their hoods shadowing their faces. They did not move, did not speak, simply waited as though they had all the time in the world. I stumbled back, covering my mouth to keep from crying out, my pulse thundering in my ears. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. When I finally looked again, the porch was empty. No cloaked figures, no sound, nothing but the medallion's faint pulse from the drawer where I had hidden it. I sank to the floor, clutching myself, realizing the rope Pastor Michael spoke of had already looped around me, and soon it would pull tight. The night after the cloaked figures appeared, I barely slept, every creak of the house making me jolt upright, convinced they had come back to drag me into that hall again. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed me out, but curiosity gnawed at me stronger than fear. The medallion I had stuffed into the drawer seemed to hum with a life of its own, as though calling to me. Against my better judgment, I retrieved it, unwrapping the cloth with trembling hands. In the light of day, the markings appeared sharper, more deliberate, and when I traced them with my fingertip, a faint warmth pulsed from the metal into my skin. Suddenly, an image flashed in my mind, so quick I thought it a trick of fatigue, a vision of the mirror, its surface rippling, a shadowy figure pressing against it from within. I dropped the medallion as though burned, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a token, it was a key. All day long, the whispers returned, clearer now, threading words into my thoughts. The rope shortens, the covenant binds, the mirror waits. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, and yet some dreadful part of me wanted to know more. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I lit a single candle and held the medallion close, demanding aloud, "What do you want from me?" My voice shook, but the air thickened instantly, heavy as if the house itself held its breath. The flame flickered wildly, and then I heard a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a voice, deep and resonant, vibrating through my bones. "You cannot run. The covenant chose you the moment you entered the circle." I stumbled back, the medallion clattering to the floor, but the voice followed, echoing in every corner. "The mirror does not forget." The rope tightens, 1 knot each day. My stomach twisted, realizing what Pastor Michael meant. Time wasn't a kindness, it was a countdown. Each day that passed, I was being drawn closer to the mirror, closer to whatever fate awaited me on the other side of that cursed glass. In my desperation, I did what I shouldn't have. I sought out an old family journal tucked away in the attic, written by my grandmother's sister long ago. I remembered hearing whispers that she had been strange, too curious for her own good, but until then I had never dared read her words. Under a film of dust, I cracked the leather binding and began to read. What I found chilled me more than the meeting ever had. She wrote of a night, decades before, when she too stumbled upon a gathering, a covenant sworn by the town's elders. She described the mirror, The same grotesque visions, the same medallion passed into her hands, and she confessed that she had tried to run. The last entry stopped abruptly, the ink smeared as though the pen had been torn away mid-sentence. No one in the family ever spoke of her again. It was as if she had been erased. My blood went cold. If her fate was to vanish into the Covenant's grasp, was mine already sealed? I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. And so, dear listener, I ask you, if you found your family's own blood had been bound to a curse, a secret stretching back generations, would you fight to break it or accept it as your destiny? Comment below, because I wonder whether my stubbornness is bravery or foolishness. And while you do, don't forget to like this tale if it keeps you on edge, and subscribe to walk with me further into this shadow, for the final knots of the rope are still to come. That night, sleep was a stranger. The candlelight cast shifting shadows that seemed to crawl across my walls, and each time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror, closer now, its surface trembling as though something inside it was desperate to break free. At midnight, I awoke to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was at the door, but when I crept through the house, the sound grew sharper, more distinct. It was coming from my bedroom. My blood ran cold as I pushed the door open, and there, across the room, stood the mirror. The same cursed mirror I had seen in the hall, now somehow inside my home. Its frame pulsed faintly as though alive, and from within my reflection stared at me, not mimicking my movements this time, but beckoning, its hand pressing against the glass with urgent insistence. My knees buckled, and I fell against the wall, unable to breathe. The Covenant had not just marked me. It had come for me. The mirror loomed before me, impossibly real, its warped frame pulsing like a living thing, its glass trembling as though barely able to contain what pressed against it. My reflection, no, not a reflection at all anymore, watched me with a hunger that chilled me to the marrow. Its lips moved, forming words I could not hear, but somehow I understood. Come closer. Every instinct screamed for me to run, to throw open the door and flee into the night, but my feet rooted to the floor, drawn by a force stronger than my own will. The medallion in my hand grew hot, almost burning, and when I tried to drop it, my fingers would not obey. A memory surged unbidden. My grandmother's sister's final words in her journal, the ink smeared in panic, and I realized with a jolt that this was the very moment she must have faced. The end of her story had become the continuation of mine. A sound filled the room then, low at first, like distant thunder, then rising into a chant. I spun around, and my breath caught. Every corner of the room was filled with shadowy figures, the congregation from the hall, cloaked and silent, their faces hidden but their presence suffocating. Pastor Michael stepped forward, his hands outstretched as if conducting the very air. "The rope tightens," he declared, his voice booming, "and tonight the covenant is sealed." My body trembled violently as he gestured toward the mirror. "The reflection must be bound, or the town will fall. You must step through." My heart lurched, bile rising in my throat. Step through? Into that cursed glass, into the waiting grasp of the hollow-eyed thing that bore my face. I shook my head wildly. "No, you can't make me." But already the mirror rippled, and the reflection extended its hand, fingers clawing through the surface as if the glass were water. Cold air poured into the room, extinguishing my candle, leaving only the dim, unnatural glow of the mirror's frame. My scream caught in my throat as the hand brushed against my cheek, ice cold, yet solid, pulling at me with terrifying strength. "It is done," Pastor Michael intoned. Desperation seized me then, a wild, furious surge. With the medallion clutched tight, I hurled it at the mirror. The instant it struck, the glass shattered. not outward, but inward, as though the mirror had collapsed upon itself. A howl erupted from within, a sound so inhuman it rattled the windows and split the night. The reflection's face twisted into fury, its mouth stretching wide in a voiceless scream before it was dragged into the collapsing void. The figures around me wailed, their chant breaking into chaos. Pastor Michael stumbled forward, his composure finally gone, his hands clawing at the air as though trying to hold the covenant together. But it was too late. The mirror imploded into nothingness, leaving only shards scattered across the floor, each one reflecting not my face, but fragments of that grotesque reflection, screaming silently until they flickered out like dying embers. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. When I looked around, the cloaked figures were gone, vanished. The room was empty, save for me, the broken shards, and the stench of smoke that lingered though nothing had burned. I collapsed to my knees, my body racked with sobs, not from grief, but from the unbearable weight of survival. For hours I stayed there, staring at the fragments, waiting for something, anything, to return. But nothing came. By dawn, I swept the shards into a box, locking it away where no one could find it. Yet even now, as I sit here telling you this story, I wonder, did I truly break the covenant or only delay its grasp? Because sometimes, in the quiet of night, I swear I hear a faint tapping, like fingers against glass, growing louder with each passing day. And so I ask you, dear listener, if the mirror came to your home, if the rope of time wrapped itself around your neck, what would you do? Would you destroy it, even at the risk of unleashing what lies beyond? Or would you surrender, hoping obedience spares you? Comment below. I need to know how you would face the reflection. And if this tale has kept you frozen in suspense, don't forget to like this story, subscribe for more chilling secrets, and share it with those who dare walk into the darkness. For though this chapter of my life has ended, the mirror waits somewhere for someone, and its glass has not forgotten my name.